Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack the complex world of military doctrine, really get into the essential thinking behind how forces operate. Today, we're diving deep into the United States Air Force. We want to explore its official doctrine, what are its core jobs, its key capabilities, and maybe most importantly, how its whole command philosophy is shifting for today's really complex security challenges.
Yeah, and for this, we've really dug into the core documents. We're looking at Air Force Doctrine Publication 1, that's the Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0 on operations, and 3.0.1, which covers command and control, plus that foundational Department of Defense Directive 5100.01, the one that outlines the functions of the Department of Defense and its major components. So quite a bit of reading.
It is. And, right from the start, especially in Air Force Doctrine Publication 1, you get this sense of a necessary philosophical shift. General Charles Q. Brown, Jr., the Chief of Staff, puts it quite pointedly. He calls doctrine an agreed-upon operationally relevant body of best practices and principles, which sounds standard enough, right?
Yeah. But then he adds this crucial bit. It guides us, but importantly does not bind us. And that little phrase signals a big change. It's about moving away from maybe overly rigid processes towards innovation, towards rapid integration, especially when you're in these dynamic contested fights where the other side is actively trying to mess with your command structure.
That phrase guides us but does not bind us. That really captures the tension, doesn't it? It suggests maybe the old way, the post-Cold War efficiency model, might be too brittle, too fragile for facing a peer adversary. So, for our dive today, here's the plan. First, we'll lay out the Air Force's fundamental purpose, the why behind it all, including those basic truths about warfare. Then we'll get operational. We'll break down those 5 core functions and see how they fit into this idea of global competition. And finally, we absolutely have to tackle that big shift in command and control, leading into how they plan to execute things like agile combat employment. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning. Air Force Doctrine Publication 1 really grapples with this fundamental question: why we fight. What are those core, unchanging truths about war that the Air Force Doctrine builds upon?
Well, the doctrine boils it down to 3 basic fundamental truths. First, and this is classic Clausewitz, war is always an instrument of policy. It's politics by other means. It means the violence has to serve a political goal. If it doesn't, it's just pointless violence. The military objective must always link back to the national political objective.
Okay, so war serves policy. What's the second truth?
The second one hits closer to the operational reality. War is inherently complex and chaotic. It's a human undertaking, full of uncertainty, unpredictability, what Clausewitz famously called friction. Everything that can go wrong does go wrong, compounded by danger and exertion. The doctrine actually points out that the key tenets of air power, things like speed, range, flexibility, are designed specifically to help airmen cut through that fog and friction, to apply force precisely where it's needed most, making the difficult seem possible.
That idea of friction is so important. The plan never survives contact, right? What's the third truth? It sounds like it focuses more on the human dimension.
Exactly. The third truth is that war is fundamentally a clash of opposing wills. It's not just machines against machines. It's human resolve against human resolve. It's a dynamic contest of action and reaction. Technology matters, of course, but ultimately, victory often comes down to breaking the enemy's will to continue fighting. Leadership character, national resolve, these are critical factors.
So you take these truths, politics, chaos, will, and they apply across different levels of conflict, don't they? Doctrine talks about strategic, operational, and tactical levels.
Correct. And air power is unique in that it can generate effects across all 3 simultaneously. The strategic level is about the why, the national objectives, the resources committed. It links the military effort back to those political goals we talked about. The operational level is the bridge. It's about what planning and conducting campaigns, sequencing major operations to achieve those strategic objectives is the art of the campaign planner. And at the tactical level is the how individual battles are fought, how specific missions are executed by units and platforms to create those desired effects on the ground, in the air, wherever. And, Air Force Doctrine Publication 1 makes a point to quote General Carl Spaatz after World War II. He argued air power was unquestionably decisive against Japan. That established air power not just as support, but as a co-equal warfighting domain alongside land and sea, decisive in its own right.
That historical weight, that sense of being decisive, really leads into the Air Force's specific responsibilities today under the current national defense strategy. What are those core contributions, those pillars the Air Force provides?
The doctrine lays out 3 key pillars. They really define the Air Force's unique value proposition. First up is global vigilance. And this isn't just about spy planes. It's the ability to gain and maintain awareness anywhere on the planet, providing warning, sure, but also fusing information from all sorts of sources, Joint Force data included, to create real, actionable intelligence for commanders. It's about seeing, connecting the dots, and making sense of it all incredibly quickly.
Okay, global vigilance, seeing and understanding. What's next?
Second is global reach. This is fundamental, especially now with distributed operations becoming so important. It's the ability to project military power responsively fast, precise, anywhere. It also means providing that massive airlift capability, the tankers, everything needed to move and sustain the Joint Force rapidly. Global reach means geography doesn't stop the Joint Force.
Vigilance, reach. And the third must be about applying force.
That's right. Global power. This is the sharp end. The ability to hold any target on Earth at risk or to strike it directly. It's about projecting sovereignty, protecting friendly forces' freedom to operate, and delivering swift, decisive effects, kinetic or otherwise, that can really disrupt an adversary. These three, vigilance, reach, and power, are the essence of the Air Force's contribution.
Understanding that power relies on complex systems and, critically, the people operating them. Let's talk about the who. How does the doctrine define an airman? It seems broader than just uniformed personnel.
It is intentionally broad, yes. The official definition in Air Force Doctrine Publication 1 includes uniformed members, naturally, but also the Department of the Air Force civilian employees and even members of the Civil Air Patrol when they're on official missions as the Air Force Auxiliary. The idea is to foster a unified culture. If you're contributing to the Air Force mission, you fall under that umbrella term, airman.
And these airmen operate under a set of core values.
Absolutely. Integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. The doctrine emphasizes these aren't just slogans, they're meant to be the bedrock for decision-making, especially crucial when you start talking about decentralizing decisions, which we'll get to. Those values provide the ethical framework. And this ties right into how leadership is defined. Leadership isn't just a position. It's defined as the art and science of motivating, influencing, and directing airmen to understand and accomplish Joint Force commander objectives. It's an active process.
That active definition seems vital for the shift towards mission command we'll discuss later. I was struck by the quote from General Curtis LeMay in the doctrine that leaders are educated, trained, and made. That implies a significant ongoing effort, especially if you expect more junior personnel, maybe in an agile combat employment scenario, to potentially act with more autonomy. Does the doctrine wrestle with that training implication?
It absolutely implies it. By stating leaders are made, the doctrine inherently accepts the responsibility for continuous education and training. You can't delegate authority effectively if people aren't prepared to exercise it wisely and ethically. LeMay's point, included right there in the foundational doctrine, really underscores that this investment in people, in their professional development, isn't optional. It's fundamental to making concepts like distributed operations actually work. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? And in a distributed network, every link needs to be strong.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the how. The Air Force delivers those pillars: vigilance, reach, power through 5 core functions. These are laid out in both the Department of Defense Directive and Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0. Can you list those for us?
Sure. The 5 are air superiority, global precision attack, rapid global mobility, global intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and command and control. These are the fundamental capabilities the Air Force brings to the joint fight.
And these functions aren't employed in a vacuum. Doctrine places them within a broader global context, this idea of the competition continuum. Can you unpack that?
Right. The competition continuum, which is detailed in Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0, is essentially a way to categorize the strategic environment. It runs from cooperation at one end, through a murky middle of competition below armed conflict, all the way to armed conflict at the other end. It helps commanders think about how to apply those core functions appropriately based on the situation.
So what does that look like at the cooperation end?
Down at the cooperation and assurance end, you see things like humanitarian assistance missions, disaster relief, security cooperation activities with allies, combined exercises. The goal here is really about building partnerships, demonstrating commitment, fostering stability, and importantly, securing access and basing rights, which might be critical later if things escalate. It's relationship building, backed by capability.
And then we move into that gray zone competition below armed conflict. The emphasis here shifts heavily towards deterrence, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Deterrence is all about discouraging an adversary from taking actions you don't want them to take. You do that by convincing them the costs will outweigh any potential benefits, or that they simply won't succeed. This is where the concept of integrated deterrence comes into play. It's a whole-of-government effort using diplomacy, economic tools, information campaigns, but crucially, backed by credible, combat-ready military forces. The Air Force's ability to project power rapidly, globally, conventionally, or even with its nuclear responsibilities is a huge part of making that deterrent threat credible. It shows you have the means and the will.
But sometimes deterrence fails or isn't the right tool. When you need to actively change an adversary's behavior during a conflict, we move into coercion. How does the doctrine differentiate the types of coercion, specifically compellence?
Right, compellence is distinct from deterrence. Deterrence is about preventing an action. Compellence is about stopping an action that's already underway or forcing an adversary to do something they don't want to do. Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0 outlines three main ways air power can be used for compellence.
Okay, what's the first?
First is denial. This strategy aims to make it physically impossible, or at least prohibitively difficult, for the adversary to achieve their objectives. You deny them the fruits of their aggression. A classic air power approach here is paralysis. This involves hitting key nodes across the enemy's system simultaneously, their command centers, logistics, fielded forces, air defenses. The idea is to overwhelm them, make resistance seem futile because their whole system is breaking down. Air power's speed and reach make it ideal for this kind of parallel warfare.
So denial stops them from succeeding. What's the second form of compellence?
The second is risk. Instead of outright denial, this approach focuses on gradually increasing the potential pain or loss for the adversary if they continue their course of action. You put things they value at risk. Air power can do this effectively because it can often bypass ground defenses and threaten strategic targets deep inside enemy territory leadership, key industries, critical infrastructure. Maybe you don't destroy it immediately, but you demonstrate you can. You make them constantly worry about what might come next, raising their perceived cost.
Okay, denial and risk. And the third?
The third is punishment. This is about inflicting direct costs, often on the adversary's military capability or war-making infrastructure, until the pain becomes unacceptable and they comply. It's crucial to emphasize this is about targeting legitimate military objectives under the laws of war, not about targeting civilians. The goal is to undermine their ability or will to sustain the fight by destroying things essential to their war effort. Again, air power's precision and ability to reach deep are key here.
It sounds like choosing between denial, risk, or punishment requires careful strategic calculation. But underpinning any of these, or really any major operation, is the first core function you listed. Air superiority. Why is that so foundational?
It's foundational because without control of the air, or at least sufficient control for your needs, everything else the Joint Force wants to do becomes much harder, much riskier, or even impossible. Air superiority allows friendly forces, land, sea, space, cyber, to operate without crippling interference from enemy aircraft or missiles. It protects the force and enables freedom of action.
Does it always mean total control?
Not necessarily. The doctrine talks about a spectrum. You might have air parity, where neither side has control, or local air superiority, meaning control over a specific area for a specific time, maybe just long enough for a ground assault or an insertion. The highest level is air supremacy, which is total dominance over the whole operational area. The Joint Force commander decides what level of control is actually needed for the mission. You don't always need absolute supremacy everywhere.
And how do you achieve that control?
Primarily through counter-air operations. This breaks down into two parts. Offensive counter-air, OCA, which is about proactively going after enemy air assets and infrastructure, hitting their planes on the ground, their airfields, their command nodes, their surface-to-air missiles before they can threaten you. And then there's defensive counter-air, DCA, which is about protecting friendly airspace and forces from incoming attacks using fighters, surface-to-air missiles, early warning systems to shoot down threats. You need both OCA and DCA for effective air control.
Let's touch on those other core functions too, because they're vital enablers. Global precision attack. What's the essence there beyond just dropping bombs accurately?
It's about the selective application of force, using advanced intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting to identify and strike high-value targets with extreme accuracy, often deep in enemy territory. It could be kinetic, a missile strike, or non-kinetic, like electronic attack. The key is minimizing collateral damage and risk to friendly forces while achieving very specific, often strategic effects. Think taking out a key command bunker or disabling a critical radar system.
And global intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance in today's data-flooded world, What's the Air Force's unique contribution?
Speed and fusion, really. It's not just about collecting data, everyone does that. It's about the Air Force's ability to rapidly acquire, process, analyze, and disseminate decision-quality information across the entire joint force, often from platforms operating at range or high altitude. In a contested environment where communications might be jammed or intermittent, being able to get the right intelligence to the right person quickly is absolutely critical, especially for enabling that decentralized execution we talked about.
Which brings us to rapid global mobility. With operations becoming more distributed, like under Agile combat employment, moving and sustaining the force seems even more critical and probably more contested.
Exactly. Rapid global mobility is the muscle behind global reach. It's the airlifts moving troops and equipment, the tankers refueling fighters and bombers midair, the air medical evacuation saving lives. And you're right, in a pure conflict scenario, those logistics lines are prime targets. We can't assume uncontested airlift or safe logistics hubs anymore, so the doctrine has to grapple with how to sustain forces that are deliberately dispersed, maybe operating from austere locations. Aerial refueling, for instance, isn't just about range. It becomes about persistence, maneuver, keeping those distributed forces viable. It's a linchpin of integrated deterrence and agile operations.
Now, a major challenge mentioned frequently is adversaries developing strong anti-accessory denial or A2AD capabilities. These sophisticated defenses make it really hard to get forces close. How does Air Force doctrine plan to counter that?
Yeah, A2AD is a huge focus in Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0. These systems, long-range missiles, advanced air defenses, electronic warfare, cyber threats, they create these bubbles that push our forces further out, restricting freedom of movement. The doctrinal approach is really about integration in standoff, using long-range fires like stealth bombers or missiles launched from outside the densest threat rings, combined with non-lethal effects, jamming radars with electronic warfare, disrupting command networks through cyber operations. The goal is to systematically degrade the adversary's kill chain, their ability to find, track, target, and engage us before we have to penetrate those defenses head-on. You poke holes in their shield first.
And layering on top of that complexity are threats like hypersonics missiles flying incredibly fast, faster than Mach 5, and maneuverable too. That must compress decision timelines dramatically.
It's a fundamental challenge. Hypersonic speed drastically reduces warning time and the time available for defensive systems to react. It puts immense pressure on our command and control systems. If your decision cycle observe, orient, decide, act is slower than the flight time of the incoming weapon, you lose. This reality is a major driver behind the push towards a more distributed, faster C2 structure. The old centralized model might simply be too slow to cope.
That's the perfect segue. You mentioned the C2 structure needing to change, and that brings us to what seems like the biggest doctrinal evolution lately, the full embrace of mission command as the core philosophy for airpower C2. Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0.1 even calls the old centralized approach an ill fit for pure conflict. That's strong wording for doctrine. Why such a stark assessment?
It is strong, and deliberately so. The core problem with the traditional, highly centralized Air Operations Center model, while efficient in permissive environments like post-Cold War conflicts, was its vulnerability. It created a single point of failure. A sophisticated peer adversary would absolutely target that central hub kinetically, electronically, through cyber attacks. If you take out the brain, the whole body is paralyzed. The shift to mission command is fundamentally about building resilience and ensuring continuity of operations, even if, or rather when, that central node is disrupted or communications are cut.
So how does the new doctrine structure this more resilient approach? It uses that specific framework. Centralized, command-distributed control, decentralized execution. Let's really unpack the difference between control and execution here, because that seems key.
It is absolutely key, and that framework is how mission command gets implemented in practice. Let's break it down. Centralized command is still vital. The overall air component commander, usually a senior airman, retains the broad authority for planning the air campaign, setting priorities, allocating forces, and ensuring everything aligns with the Joint Force Commander's overall objectives for the theater. You need that top-level direction for unity of effort. You can't have everyone just doing their own thing completely independently.
Okay, so the top-level strategic direction remains centralized. What then is distributed control? That sounds like the big innovation.
That is the big innovation. Distributed control is about delegating specific command and control authorities down to lower echelon commanders, maybe an Air Expeditionary Task Force commander operating forward. Critically, this delegation empowers that subordinate commander to actually conduct the C2 process for their assigned forces and mission sets. So think about it this way. They receive the higher commander's intent and objectives, And then they can plan, task, and direct their own forces, potentially even generate their own local air tasking order to meet those objectives without needing constant, real-time approval from the main Air Operations Center. This is what allows operations to continue even if the link back to headquarters is down. The subordinate commander has the authority to control the fight within their designated scope.
Ah, okay. So distributed control is about delegating the authority to plan and direct assigned forces. How does that differ from the more familiar concept of decentralized execution?
Decentralized execution is about delegating execution authority down to the tactical edge, the pilot in the cockpit, the controller on the scope, the team on the ground. This has always been a part of air power, really. It's about empowering those frontline decision makers to adapt to the immediate realities of the fight, to exploit fleeting opportunities or react to unexpected threats, all while staying within the bounds of the mission orders and the commander's intent. So distributed control is about the commander at, say, the task force level being able to write the plan and issue the orders. Decentralized execution is about the flight lead having the latitude to hit target B instead of target A because A is weathered in without having to call back for permission. One is about controlling the process, the other is about executing the task flexibly.
That distinction is much clearer now. Thanks. The Doctrine 3.1 uses a historical example Joint TaskForce proven force in the First Gulf War to show this isn't just theory.
Yes, that's a great example they included. Brigadier General Buster Glosson commanded proven force, flying missions into northern Iraq from Turkey. General Horner, the overall air boss, gave him broad objectives and significant delegated authority. Glosson and his team essentially ran their own air campaign in the north, planning, tasking, executing, assessing, generating a high sortie rate with forces tailored for that specific area. They operated effectively with delegated control, demonstrating that it can work if you have clear intent, trust, and capable subordinate commanders. It validated the concept years ago, really.
And for this whole system to work, especially the distributed parts, everyone needs to follow a common command and control process. Doctrine lays out 4 iterative steps: planning, preparing, executing, and assessing. Any key points to highlight within that process, especially in light of mission command?
Yes, a couple of things stand out in the newer doctrine. Within planning, there's a renewed emphasis on design. Design isn't just making the plan. It's the conceptual work before the detailed planning. It's about truly understanding the problem, the operational environment, the adversary, and clearly defining the objectives. What does success actually look like? Getting the design right, achieving that clarity from complexity, is foundational for everything that follows, especially when you need subordinate commanders to understand the why behind their orders. Okay, strong emphasis on design up front. What else? The other notable point is that preparing is now explicitly called out as a distinct activity between planning and execution. In the past, it might have been rushed or folded into the others. Preparation is about refining the plan, coordinating among all the players, ensuring resources are ready, wargaming, rehearsing essentially, bridging that gap, and building the shared understanding and trust needed for smooth execution. If the people executing don't fully grasp the plan and the intent developed during planning, decentralized execution becomes incredibly risky. So that dedicated prep phase is vital.
And then, during execution, how does the commander's role change under this mission command philosophy?
The commander's role shifts significantly. Instead of being deep in the weeds directing every tactical move, they focus on battle management, monitoring the overall flow of operations, assessing progress towards the objectives, allocating resources where needed, but fundamentally empowering subordinates. They trust the subordinate commanders, enabled by distributed control, and the tactical executors, enabled by decentralized execution, to make adjustments based on the situation, guided by the initial intent. If the commander has done the planning and preparing phases well, instilling that trust and shared understanding, they can afford to step back slightly during execution and let their people fight, intervening only when necessary to adjust the overall effort. Constant micromanagement during execution signals a failure of the preceding steps.
This all points towards needing incredibly tight integration, not just within the Air Force, but across all the services and domains. That brings us to concepts like joint all-domain operations and the enabling architecture, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2.
Precisely. JADC2 is the technological and procedural backbone needed to make this vision of integrated distributed operations a reality. Air Force Doctrine Publication 3 Alloco defines it quite broadly as the art and science of decision-making that allows us to rapidly translate decisions into actions. It's about sensing, understanding, and acting faster and more effectively than the adversary by leveraging capabilities seamlessly across all domains: air, land, sea, space, cyber, the electromagnetic spectrum. JDC2 is what connects the distributed sensors to the distributed shooters under that distributed control philosophy.
And what's the technological vision behind JDC? It sounds like more than just better radios.
Oh, much more. The vision, particularly from the Department of the Air Force, involves creating a robust, resilient network that connects everything: sensors on satellites, aircraft, ground stations, ships, to decision makers and weapon systems. A huge part of this is human-machine teaming, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to sift through the massive amounts of data, identify threats, suggest courses of action, and accelerate the decision cycle far beyond human speed alone. But, and this is critical, the doctrine is adamant that commanders retain appropriate human judgment, especially regarding the use of lethal force. AI assists the commander. It doesn't replace their judgment or ethical responsibility. It's about augmenting human decision-making, not automating it entirely, particularly for the most critical decisions.
So JADC2 provides the connective tissue. How does the Air Force plan to physically operate in this contested distributed environment? The key scheme of maneuver seems to be agile combat employment.
Yes, Agile Combat Employment, or ACE, is the operational concept designed for survivability and resilience in a peer conflict. It's detailed in an appendix to Air Force Doctrine Publication 3.0. Instead of concentrating forces at a few large, easily targetable main bases, ACE involves dispersing smaller packages of aircraft and personnel across a network of numerous locations, some established hubs, but many smaller, more austere spoke locations or clusters of bases. This complicates the enemy's targeting problem immensely. They either have to expend a lot of resources trying to find and hit many small targets, or they risk letting significant combat power survive if they only focus on the known main bases. It's about being proactively and reactively maneuverable on the ground to increase survivability.
That sounds incredibly challenging to pull off. What does the doctrine say are the absolute must-haves, the key enablers for ACE to actually work?
There are 3 core enablers identified, and they tie back perfectly to our discussion. First, you need mission-ready airmen. But this means more than just being trained in your primary job. It requires multi-skilled airmen trained in expeditionary skills who can operate in these potentially degraded, austere environments with limited support. Think maintenance crews who can refuel aircraft, or security forces who can help with logistics. Cross-functional teams are essential.
Makes sense. What's the second enabler?
Second, and we've hit this hard already, is mission command. It's non-negotiable for ACE. You have to assume that forces dispersed to these forward locations will lose reliable communication with higher headquarters at times. Therefore, those deployed commanders and teams need pre-delegated authorities based on clear commander's intent and predefined conditions to make decisions and continue the mission even when disconnected. Without mission command, ACE forces become isolated and ineffective the moment comms go down.
Okay, multi-skilled airmen and mission command. The third.
The third is posture. This is about balancing predictability and unpredictability. Your overall strategic posture needs to be somewhat predictable to assure allies and deter adversaries they need to know you're there and committed. But your operational posture, where specific assets are at any given moment, needs to be unpredictable. Constantly shifting forces between main bases and dispersed locations, using deception, leveraging mobility, it keeps the adversary guessing and makes their targeting far more difficult. Strategically predictable, operationally unpredictable.
This whole complex system, the functions, the C2, the maneuver concepts, ultimately falls under the responsibility of the senior Air Force commander in a theater. Can you just recap their critical dual-hatted role? There seems to be an inherent tension there.
There absolutely is. The senior airman typically wears 2 hats: Commander, Air Force Forces, or COMO4, and Joint Force Air Component Commander, JFACC. As COMO4, they exercise administrative control, often called ADCON, over all the assigned United States Air Force forces. This is their Title 10 service-specific responsibility: organizing, training, equipping, ensuring readiness, managing the force for the long haul. They represent the Air Force's equities.
Okay, that's the service hat. What's the joint hat?
As the JFACC, designated by the overall Joint Force Commander, they exercise tactical control, or TACON, over all air assets made available for tasking in the theater, regardless of service. This includes Air Force assets, but also potentially Navy, Marine, Army, and even coalition air power. Their job as JFACC is to integrate and synchronize all these disparate air assets to achieve the Joint Force Commander's objectives, ensuring unity of effort for the air campaign.
So they have to balance the needs of the joint fight right now as JFACC with the long-term health and readiness of their own services forces as COMAFOR.
Exactly. That's the fundamental tension. Sometimes what's best for the immediate joint fight might put excessive strain on specific Air Force assets or personnel. The commander has to constantly balance those competing demands, near-term tactical necessity versus long-term service readiness. It's one of the toughest jobs in the joint force structure. Hashtag tag outro.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. It's clear the Air Force doctrine is undergoing a really significant transformation, moving deliberately from a focus on maybe centralized efficiency towards distributed resilience, really gearing up for potential peer conflict. That shift away from purely centralized control towards distributed control enabled by mission command seems absolutely critical for operating in contested spaces. And concepts like agile combat employment look like the practical way to make that resilience happen on the ground.
It truly is a major shift. But the fundamental importance of doctrine itself remains. General LeMay's words, quoted again in Air Force Doctrine Publication 1, really resonate. At the very heart of warfare lies doctrine. It represents the central beliefs for waging war in order to achieve victory. The doctrine we've discussed today, with all its changes, is clearly aimed at defining those beliefs for victory in this complex, modern era.
And that leaves us, and you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on. We've talked about how joint all-domain operations increasingly rely on technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning to achieve decision speed and integrate effects across domains. So here's the question. How should commanders balance that relentless push for tactical speed, which AI promises, with the equally critical human-centric requirements of mission command, things like shared understanding, mutual trust, and ultimately prudent human judgment and risk management, especially when lethal force is involved? That tension between machine speed and human trust feels like it might be one of the defining challenges for military leadership going forward.